Today we'll be talking about intermittent fasting and more importantly, how the body works and how body responds to food and everything else that happens. And once you understand that, I believe it's much easier to what some people call hack your body so that you can benefit from all the aspects of, uh, of the physiology of our body and the way our body responds to fasting. So that way, uh, we can move forward even when we feel we are stuck. Okay. Before we start, a quick disclaimer. These are my personal opinions. They are not of the organization that I work in, like Guy's and St. Thomas's Hospital or the NHS. Advice that I'm giving here is, of course, for educational purposes. It cannot be seen as a one-to-one consultation because I cannot do remotely, and whatever I say has only generic meaning. I am a consultant physician. I practice privately also. So I do make money from what I'm going to talk about. But again, that doesn't mean this is a paid session in terms of this will be specific advice for your health condition. If you do have one, either you can speak to your doctor or you can speak to me separately, but please do not take this as one-to-one advice. Okay. Once that is out of the way, let me quickly tell you what we'll do today. So firstly, I'll just give you a brief introduction by way of how I got where I am, and then move very quickly into what is the science, what are the benefits, and what are the benefits outside the standard sort of weight loss, diabetes, hypertension world. What about hunger? And I think most of us worry about that. And then how do we apply it in real life? And then we'll open it up for question and answers. Okay, so as many of you probably know, like many Indian kids, I was reasonably fit and well, fairly active, played all sorts of games and sport at national level, then went to the Armed Forces Medical College, remained physically active. So weight was never an issue. I thought I was reasonably sort of healthy in that sense, and carried on with life. I do have a strong family history in the sense on my father's side, we have 100% diabetes. All my uncles and aunts have already passed away, and almost all my cousins on my father's side also have diabetes and hypertension and other. Some of my cousins have also passed away, the youngest of whom is just a few years older than me, with fairly extensive complications of diabetes. So in a way, I sort of knew the sort of genetic burden I was born with, and being reasonably healthy, eating standard sort of Indian food, not sort of being brought up on pizza and Coca-Cola, I thought I was doing all right. All through my 18 years of military life, I remained reasonably well, didn't have any health problems, was regularly being checked, obviously as part of our medical examination. Nothing came out wrong. So that was before 2010. In 2006, I moved to the UK, started working in the NHS as a consultant. And then in around 2010, I had a regular sort of checkup. And it turned out that I was diabetic also. Initially, like others who may have gone through this process, you do have what is called as the grief response. Why me? I'm not, the people you might see on the street who are grossly overweight, don't sort of control what they eat or drink, what time they sleep. They probably don't exercise very much. So then why did it happen to me? And so I went through all that, attempted all sorts of diet and exercise to try and control the diabetes for about 6 months. Didn't really work. Went back to my doctor and said, okay, I think I need to start medication. And I started that. The one thing I definitely want to highlight is I thought being a sort of frontline clinician, frontline consultant, I could follow guidelines, benefit from them, and be able to control this disorder. Even now, most people believe diabetes is a lifetime disorder. Once you have it, it's forever, and you can't do anything about it. uh, uh, and that's the route I went down. So these points, these bullet points are what standard diabetes guidelines in 2020, even now, they say, which is have a balanced diet, high fiber, low glycemic index, fruit, vegetables, pulses, whole grains, low fat dairy products, oily fish, and control saturated fat. And I'm sure all of you have heard about this. Most of us sort of follow this. We eat this kind of food. We are not, most of us have not sort of been very indisciplined about our food and lifestyles. We might have a party every weekend or once a week, but apart from that, we live reasonably healthy lifestyles. But for some reason, we still don't seem to be able to control these disorders. And I'm going to explain why that happens, why we are in this position, and that part of that is due to good scientific reason. Just to quickly run through my own sort of chart. September 2010 is when I was diagnosed, and basically my lipid profile and my blood sugar weren't great. I would like you to follow this blue line, which is HbA1c. And as you might know this, HbA1c is the indicator of how our medium to long-term diabetes control is happening. And so initially it was around 7.4 when I was diagnosed. With medication and lifestyle changes, I brought it back down to 6.5, which is sort of the cutoff for diabetes. But over time, it started rising gradually. And with various sort of, whenever I was feeling strong enough, I brought it back under control. But you'll notice that from 2016 onwards, it started going up. And I think the big turnaround moment for me was December 2018, when I went for a routine checkup and found that my HbA1c was obviously 7.8, so close to 8. And I'd also developed hypertension. My blood pressure was 150 over 110. That really got me. It really was like a kick in the stomach because I thought, right, here I am heading down the same route that all my other siblings have gone. I will develop all the complications. The bottom few lines are related to my lipid profile. September 2016, this dramatic change is not because of me. As per UK guidelines, I went on a statin called atorvastatin. So UK guidelines say we should all have lipid profile checked if we are diabetic. And if it goes above a certain level, we should be on treatment. So this was thanks to medicine. But again, you'll notice that towards the end of 2018, they had started rising. Anyway, so 2018 is when I started reviewing literature and looking at what else could be done. Came across very good evidence that actually intermittent fasting was a way to manage many lifestyle disorders. And so I started doing that. 3 months later, so this is March, April of 2019, I was back at 6.5 without any changes in medication. And my blood pressure had come back to normal without any medication. So I was on 1 tablet of metformin for my diabetes, nothing else, and antihypertensives, none, right? And since then, we've tried to remain that way. So it's this point where I thought I was very excited, started talking to people about it. And more people that I spoke with, a lot of them wanted to do this, follow my advice. And over the last sort of 1.5 years, I've gone on to help about 30 odd people. I wouldn't call them my patients because many of them are very far away from me, but I give them one-to-one advice. I create similar charts and tables and monitor their medication, their lab results, their blood glucose, and so on. And really delighted that of the 30, about 20 people were diabetic, most of whom do not take any anti-diabetic medications anymore. Of the 20, 4 were on insulin. These are obviously type 2 diabetics. Most of them 60, 70, 80, the eldest one being 80 plus. And all 4 who were on insulin are not on insulin anymore. And some of the people who are non-diabetic, but were going through this process for other reasons, whether that's health or other disorders, like hypertension, heart disease, cholesterol, polycystic ovarian syndrome, and so on, they've also seen very desirable results with those sort of outcomes, right? So that's how I've reached here, and I'm really happy that we are moving down this route. So let's get into the science now. And I think the first thing I would like to do is try and convince you why what you've been trying to do until now doesn't seem to work, or it works for a short period of time and then stops working. And so the first one is this concept we have, and some of the concepts that we have held, including me, will be broken today. And if you want more literature, I can send it to you. But some of these concepts are completely wrong. We've been fed wrong science. We need to get rid of it. And if doctors like me didn't know about it, what chance does a layperson have? So here I am. So we've always sort of thought about weight, energy, whatever you want to call it, in these terms, that if you eat less and exercise more, you will lose weight. And if you eat more and exercise less, you'll gain weight. It's like a bank balance. How much you put in and how much you take out is how these things happen. In reality, we've all tried that at some point in our life, and we've realized it might work for a short while and then it stops, or it doesn't work at all. And the reason is very, very simple. This is sort of the rough calculation, depending on your body weight, on the amount of calories you can burn if you exercise for 60 minutes every day, right? So brisk walking up to running from 300 to 800 calories if you are 80 kgs, and about 200 calories less than that if you are about 60 kilos in weight. The problem we have is the food that we are surrounded with is very, very calorie dense, very high energy. So if you start your day with a coffee and a muffin or a coffee and a snack, whatever shape or form it is, even if you have a skimmed milk, what is called as a skinny latte here, you're still starting your day with at least 400 calories that have already gone in. And based on the previous chart, you can see that equals about 1 hour in the gym. And very quickly it becomes clear that you cannot out-exercise a bad diet, right? So even if you think you're eating a reasonably healthy diet, and I go for a run, or I go to the gym 3 days a week or 5 days a week, I do 30 minutes on the treadmill, I go for a walk every morning or evening, I do exercise, I do yoga, you'll find that at some point that stops working. Yes, you're exercising, therefore you're burning some energy, but the balance is so bad that that scale never actually achieves middle. It's always weighted towards what you're eating because of the nature of food that we end up eating. And this is when we think we're being reasonably healthy. We are not sort of having very heavy foods all the time, right? And that's the problem with this first sort of paradigm we have of exercise versus what we eat. The other one is, okay, I'll still have my 3 meals a day. I'll do whatever little exercise I do. I have a snack with my tea at 11 o'clock and 4 o'clock. I'll just eat less of everything. So I will sort of what is called as calorie restrict myself. And that should help because, again, I'm putting less in. My output is exactly the same. Therefore, over a period of time, I should lose weight. And yes, initially, one will lose weight. As you can see here, for the first few months, maybe, one will lose weight. But then weight starts plateauing off. And then sadly, towards the end, as in between 6 and 8 months, one starts gaining that weight back again. And this is not because we have lost self-control. And sometimes even I, as a doctor, would say that, you're losing control, you're greedy, you're probably quietly eating stuff, you're just not telling it, you're not accepting that you don't have any self-discipline, you don't have any self-control. And all these sort of victim shaming, as some people would call it, is gone there. And as patients, we would feel guilty about it. As individuals, we'd think, yeah, I'm not trying hard enough. But in reality, this is what's happening, as you see on the screen. There are no studies of weight loss beyond 1 year in the world just by calorie restriction. And the reason is that as you start doing this, your body adapts to what you could call a low energy system. So your hormones readjust and your body just learns to live in the number of calories you're giving it. And so you become a little bit tired, a little bit weak all the time, a little bit low energy, a little bit of headache all the time. If you look at food or if you eat a little bit of food, you tend to gain weight very, very quickly and you feel a bit cold all the time. And this is because all the hormones have sort of reset themselves to this new normal. And now whatever you're doing just doesn't work. And that's why just by eating less also, you'll find that your results plateau off, right? Again, not your fault. This is how your body works. The third option was, okay, I'm just going to eat healthy food, traditional food. Our ancestors have been eating it forever. It should work for me. It worked for my parents. It worked for me when I was a young person. How come it doesn't work for me now? I eat exactly what my parents used to eat and I used to eat, depending on which part of the country or the world you come from. This could be roti or rice or noodles or whatever else was your staple diet. And you should be fine. The problem is that the roti or rice or noodles or whatever else you were eating as a child is not the same as what you're getting today. All the grains are now hybridized. They are not the same grains as they were before. They've been super polished. They've been super refined. They're very high in carbohydrate, very low in fiber. And what that means is that when you eat that, it just doesn't have the same effect as it would before. So what happens then is you eat the same, you think, for example, I used to eat about 2 or 3 rotis in my meal. You have the same rotis, but now because there is no fiber in that atta, the speed at which that is metabolized, which means it's digested and absorbed into my system, is way, way faster, right? And as you can see here, it has to the tune of about 75% just pure carbohydrate. And so one of the biggest problems that's been is that when you get such high amounts of carbohydrate, it triggers a very high and very rapid insulin response, which then creates all the problems, which I'll be coming to very, very soon. So even when we were eating our traditional diet, or we continue to eat our traditional diet, we don't get the same benefit because what we are eating has inherently changed. It's not the same as what we used to eat. You can buy bread today and leave it in your house, and there's no fungus on it. That just shows how much processing has happened, that even fungus don't want to grow on it. It's basically you're eating plastic, right? So processed food, processed, refined, hybridized things have really destroyed our metabolism in a very, very big way. So that doesn't work. Then there's a big trend towards millets, saying, well, there are better grains, and there are all sorts of millets which can be very, very useful. So I'm going to move towards a millet-based diet, and that should help. And I've listed a few examples, and depending on which part of the world you come from, you might use a different terminology for it. But broadly speaking, these are sort of hardy grains that withstand drought very nicely. They're supposed to be high in minerals like calcium, magnesium, and so on. Some vitamins like B group of vitamins. But the bottom line is that they still have about 60 to 70% carbohydrates. And the protein content may vary between 8 to 10%, which is like wheat. And the fat content is between 1 to 2%. So one might make the case that yes, millet is probably slightly better, but it's probably also that it's probably less processed, but inherently it is still pure carbohydrate. And carbohydrate is something that one needs to understand very, very specifically. So most of us will probably know this, that our fasting blood sugar, for simple calculation purposes, is about 100 milligrams in about 100 milliliters of blood, or what is called as 100 milligrams per deciliter of blood. And an average person has about 5 liters of blood, or 5,000 milliliters of blood. So if you extrapolate that, our blood carries, because it's 100 milligrams and 100 milliliters, there's about 5 grams in 5,000 milliliters of blood, or 5 liters of blood. And 5 grams of sugar is basically 1 spoon of sugar, right? So in a normal healthy state, the amount of sugar in your blood and my blood should be just about 1 teaspoon of sugar. So if you put 2 spoons of sugar into your tea, you've just doubled your blood sugar level. And that's how difficult it has become when you eat refined foods. You're just dumping sugar straight into your blood. And the only way the body can deal with that is, of course, release insulin to try and push that sugar out from your blood into other cells. And if that's not possible, then it goes straight into your liver for temporary storage. And if that's not enough, then it goes into your fat stores. So the problem we have is exactly that the amount of carbohydrate we eat very quickly turns, the more refined it is, very quickly turns into sugar, and it raises our blood sugars very, very quickly, causing all the problems. So millet may be slightly better, but it still is a problem. And that's what I was talking about. So even if we look at all the types of millets, 70%, 65 to 70% carbohydrate. Wheat is not too far away. Rice is almost 80% carbohydrate. Wheat is about 70%. If you look at proteins, wheat is about 11%. The best ones are around 12% in millets. So again, not a huge difference. If you look at fat, 4% versus 1.5%. So slightly more fat, and these are healthy fats, so which we will be talking more about. Fats are actually quite good for us. So that's the argument around millets. So maybe they're slightly better, but they still don't give you don't help you solve the problem that we have. So what are we left with then? So today's main options now left are when to eat and what to eat. And the argument around when to eat is, again, if you go back to tradition, the traditional way of eating was not that when the farmer lived in the village, that they would get up in the morning and start eating. They would get up in the morning, probably have a cup of tea, and then go straight to the farm to work. Their first meal would be when they took a break around 11 or 12 under a tree. And then their second meal, and they continue to work in the field. Second meal would be just before sunset, and that would be the end of the day, right? So when you eat has really changed because this concept of breakfast is the most important meal of the day came about. Unfortunately, that's not true. We do not need breakfast. If you think about it, when you wake up in the morning, you're not hungry. You're not dying of hunger. Hunger happens usually around 9 o'clock because we're used to eating breakfast. In fact, the concept of breakfast is the most important meal of the day was created by Kellogg's when they had cornflakes. Before that, there was no such concept of breakfast. So it's a completely market-created artificial construct. It's not really required. So that's number one. And number two is the whole concept about feeding and fasting. If we go back even further in history and our evolution, then we were living in forests. We might be living in a group in a cave or similar such sort of grouping systems. We would go out hunting. And if we were sort of vegetarian, we might go out looking for fruits or other such things. Whenever we found an animal that we could kill or a tree which we could harvest for fruit, we would bring that back. Everybody would eat it. So we'd have a great feast. And after that feast, we'd feel great and relax, right? Live in that cave. Now, the next time we might be able to kill an animal or find a fruiting tree might be a few days later or sometimes a week later. And so what did not happen is while you were hungry there, we didn't just waste away and die. If that would have happened, we wouldn't be here today. What actually happens, physiologically speaking, is our hormones start rising to maintain our blood sugar level. So blood sugar levels don't really fall because there are various mechanisms to create sugar in our body as a source of energy. So fat can convert to sugar, protein can convert to sugar, and of course, sugar is sugar, right? If you think about it, you've all heard about essential fatty acids, fats that we have to eat like omega-3 and essential oils and all those things, without which we will not do well. We've all heard about essential amino acids, things that are very important for our muscles and our growth. These are amino acids which build protein, which are our building blocks of health. You have never heard of essential carbohydrates because there is nothing called essential carbohydrates. Our body doesn't need carbohydrates. Everything that we need, we can get from proteins and fats, and we can make as much carbohydrate from our own body as we need. So there's nothing sacrosanct about carbohydrates. Our world has just become carbohydrate dependent, right? So that's really, really important to understand. But going back to our caveman and cavewoman, so they were lying there, they've not had anything to eat. The body starts breaking down fat stores that they had stored before from the feast to maintain metabolism. And then our counter-regulatory hormones like growth hormone, cortisol, adrenaline, they start rising, testosterone. because the body says, right, if you don't feed me, I'm going to die. You better go and find more food for me. So actually in a fasting state, your energy levels go up because you have to go and hunt for more food, or find trees where you need that. So you remember that when you eat, especially after a lunch, you want to lie down and you've got brain fog, you want to sleep. Whereas when you skip a meal, whether it was because you were busy or anything else, actually your brain is much more alert. And that's because of these counter-regulatory hormones and something called ketones. So our problem-solving skills actually are better when our stomach is empty. Our team working skills, so that we could go and hunt as a team, are better when we are fasting. And so on an empty stomach, we are better managers, we are better leaders, and we are better team workers because of those reasons. And so fasting is much better for our brain than actually eating too much, which results in brain fog and all those sort of problems. So that's the argument about when to eat, and then what to eat. I've already talked about all the constituents of food, but the most important thing, I think the one message if you have to take away today, is to ban anything in your house which says low fat. Because what this world has undergone in the last 20, 30, 40 years, when we were told that fat is bad, that from anything fat was taken out. So if you were going to buy 100 grams of something, and let's say 20 grams was fat and fat was taken out, now you had only 80 grams of that thing. And so manufacturers then had to put something back to make it 100 again. And this, what was put back, was carbohydrates. It's disguised in all sorts of names. It might be even things like brown sugar, which is more healthy, apparently. It isn't. It's still sugar. It'll be disguised as what will be called maltose extract, or fructose extract, and malt sugar, and all those sort of things. All of them are basically sugar, right? So when they took out 20% of fat, they replaced it with 20% carbohydrates, usually refined, manufactured carbohydrates. And that's what's driving the diabetes epidemic in the world. That's what's driving the obesity, hypertension, heart disease epidemic of the world. Eating good fats does not make us fat. It doesn't raise our cholesterol. 90% of the cholesterol is actually manufactured by the liver, not from diet, right? And we had to stop eating eggs for so many years because we thought eating eggs was giving us heart disease. So that is the key sort of message that has become much more clear in the last sort of 10 years of research. And we are talking a lot about flattening the curve. This is one picture. If you had to sort of burn this picture into your brain, because it's all about insulin. If you are diabetic, stop thinking about your blood sugar, start thinking about what's happening to your insulin. So every time we have glucose, if we have a carbohydrate, it'll be digested, it becomes into glucose. When glucose enters our blood, insulin shoots up and then remains high for a period of time before it will gradually come down. On the other hand, if you had protein, insulin will still go up, but the scale of rise is slower and less higher, and then it will very quickly come back down. And if you eat fat, insulin will still go up, but to a much, much smaller level, and then it will plateau off. And this is really, really important because insulin is a really important hormone. It's a very, very powerful hormone. And when we say counter-regulatory, I've listed cortisol, adrenaline, growth hormone, and on the other side, there's just insulin. And that's how powerful it is, right? Insulin promotes hunger. It pushes sugar into the liver, where it is stored as glycogen, as temporary storage, about 150 grams, but the rest is converted into fat, like triglycerides and so on. And it promotes fat deposition, especially in the truncal area or in the abdominal area, and it promotes abdominal obesity, and as we know, that is the big culprit. But more importantly, insulin blocks the first step of what is called as lipolysis, which is fat breakdown from our fat stores cannot happen if insulin levels are high. It just won't let the first step take place. So even if you think you're eating a healthy diet, you just can't burn fat because your insulin levels are high. Insulin also promotes salt and water retention in the body. So people who are on insulin, or people who've prescribed insulin to your patients, you'll know that when you put people on insulin, they will develop what is called as insulin edema because insulin acts on the distal tubule to cause salt and water retention. And so the real thing we need to be thinking about, the real thing we need to frame our thinking around is not sugar, but insulin. And this really was the key message I took away after all my research studies, is that we frame diabetes in the wrong way. We frame diabetes in terms of sugar. We should frame diabetes in terms of insulin, especially type 2 diabetes. And many of you may know all this already, that just by controlling diabetes, you cannot control the long-term complications, except probably diabetic kidney disease. The thing that most people will fall victim to with diabetes is heart disease and stroke. And then some people will develop retinal problems, eye problems, nerves problems. And most of these are not affected by good blood sugar control. But insulin toxicity, or what is called as hyperinsulinemia and insulin resistance, is the main issue that's driving all these things. And that's why if you start thinking in terms of insulin, then you understand fasting much better and why things don't work much better. And insulin, of course, like I said, means glucose. Right. So now we come to when should we eat and how long do we need to fast? And this is the next sort of chart that's very, very useful to keep in mind. What this chart shows is that when we stop eating, so this is, if you think about, this is your dinner, you've had your dinner, your insulin levels were really high because you've just had a meal and your body is digesting it and using it up. And as all that digestion is completed, insulin levels start dropping. As insulin levels start dropping, the body still needs energy to keep going. And so it will draw upon the stores in the liver, which is about 150 grams of glycogen. That will be brought into the system and used up. Once that is also used up at about the 12 to 20 hour mark, 12 to 16 hour mark, insulin levels will reach a point. And if you think about it, it's like a log curve. So there's a steep element to the curve and then there's a flatter element to the curve. But around 16 hours, insulin levels drop to a fair enough level that now the gate for fat burning opens. The lipolytic pathway can start because now the first enzyme to break down adipose tissue. So there's something called triacylglycerol or triglyceride, which is the main sort of molecule. And that is to be broken down into glycerol and 3 fatty acid chains. And the first enzyme there is blocked by insulin. So once insulin drops, that blockage is taken away and fatty acids can be released. And then fatty acids can be used in the Krebs cycle to generate energy. And that's why you must have heard a lot about 16 hours of fasting, because that's the magic number that one needs to achieve. If you keep going beyond that, you'll still get more and more benefit, but anything less than 16 hours of fasting doesn't really cut it. Any benefit you receive before that is just due to calorie restriction. And like I said, initially, all systems will produce results. There's no doubt. But if you want to maintain those results, then one has to look at fasting beyond 16 hours, right? Otherwise, you don't get the same benefit. Now, that I'm also not trying to say that is the only way to solve this problem. There are multiple ways in which you can achieve the same benefit of trying to control your insulin levels. That could be just by taking a low carbohydrate diet, by using a window that suits you. And so you basically have to start thinking in terms of when are you going to eat? What is going to be your feeding window? I call it feasting window because you should feast. When should I fast? What is going to be my fasting window? And of course, always remember that we don't want the body to get used to the system, because then all the hormones will reset at that lower level. So to make sure that your body thinks you're working on a high energy turnover system, but you are making sure that the same amount of calories, we are not restricting calories, we are eating the same amount of food in a different time window so that our metabolism remains high, but the way we supply it energy means that we are more and more in fat burning system rather than sugar burning system. And therefore these cheat days are really, really important, which means that at least once a week, possibly two times a week. Again, this depends on what is your underlying health condition. If you're somebody who's otherwise fit and healthy, you can have 2 days of cheating and 5 days of fasting. Some people do a 4-3. If one is more towards sort of advanced diabetes, I would recommend they do 6 days of fasting and 1 day of feasting. But feasting is still very, very important. And there are various ways of fasting. So like I said, one could be just reducing the amount of carbohydrates somebody takes. And again, there is low carbohydrate diets and very low carbohydrate diets and ketogenic diets. Or I prefer the method of fasting because that's more physiological, where one might start with an aim to achieve 16 hours of fasting, move on to 18, 20 to 24. And then the more you do it, the more benefit you can get out of it. The longest I have done is about, I think, 84 hours of fasting. That's about 3.5 days. Um, I'm not trying to boast. It's no big deal. Once you understand how the physiology works, it is very, very easy to do. It's not that I'm a saint or anything like that. I enjoy my tandoori chicken, and I'll give you some pictures of what food I eat. I do everything as I would. Last 2 days I've been on call, and I fasted for the full 24 hours. My energy levels are better. I'm more calm in all the emergencies. My team is happy. I'm not a grumpy guy. In fact, I think I do a better job when I'm in a fasting state than when I'm in a fed state. So there is no single rule. This is not what somebody might call Babaji ka pravachan. There's only one way of doing it. And if you don't do it, it's not going to work. And it's only my way. And there's no other way. Every system has its pros and cons. You can choose your 16-hour window. So there are people who will say, I still want my 3 meals a day. I want breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And then I want my fast. As long as they do that in 8 hours, that's fine. So somebody will have an early breakfast, but then also have an early dinner. So if you had breakfast at 9, your eating window opened at 9 o'clock, which means 8 hours later, which is 5 p.m., you should have had your dinner. There are other people who say, no, I can't do that. I need to have my dinner on time. In which case, let's say you have your dinner at 8 or 9 o'clock, then your fasting starts from 9 o'clock. When you're sleeping, you're fasting. When you're not eating, you're fasting. So from 9 o'clock to next morning, 9 o'clock is 12 hours. Add another 4 hours, that takes you to 1 p.m. Your first meal the next day is going to be 1 p.m. Also, you could change that every day of the week. So if I've got a party to attend on Friday, my clock will reset on Friday because I know I'll be having a few drinks and then I'll eat probably around 10 o'clock. So my 16 hours starts from 10 o'clock. Doesn't matter. The next day I might be going for a brunch on a Saturday or a Sunday. Okay, my 16 hours will start from a heavy brunch. It doesn't matter. So you can choose any window you like as long as it suits your lifestyle. It should not become a burden. It should still be fun. You should still enjoy the food that you're eating. In your brain, you should feel happy. And in your stomach, you should feel full, right? Both those things are really, really important. And that's where cheating also comes in, because if you felt you were deprived of something, on your cheat days, you can basically eat whatever you want. And that includes alcohol. So we tend to avoid drinks that are rich in carbohydrates, like beer, lager, cider, but hard liquor is absolutely fine because it's zero carbohydrates. So move towards whiskey, vodka, gin, red wine, absolutely fine. No restrictions on that at all. Right. This is, again, a sort of representation. Sorry, it's not coming out completely in focus, but just to show you, now that you understand how insulin behaves, the spikes are when you eat carbohydrates. Even if you have a little bit of protein and fat, if the predominant food item is carbohydrates, you're going to trigger a very high insulin response and therefore weight gain. And as you move towards proteins and fats, things start getting better. If you restrict carbohydrates, which is what I was talking about, you'll get some benefit. Insulin levels will drop. If you go into fasting, even better. Combine exercise with fasting, fantastic responses. And if you want, in the Q&A, we'll talk about the role of exercise in all this. Here's an example. The last time you went for a party, and if you're a non-vegetarian, you had all the sort of meats you could. If you're vegetarian, you probably had all the rich paneer and other dishes. And by the time the meal ended, I definitely have been to parties where I thought I need to lie down. I've just eaten too much. If I eat anymore, I will vomit, right? You're that full. Your brain is happy. Your stomach is happy. You're feeling fantastic. And you think, okay, that's it. But then the sweet dish comes along, the dessert comes along, and magically there's space in your tummy to eat more. Now, how does that happen? Again, it's not that we are greedy people. It's very good physiology. So our hunger center or our satiety center is much more triggered by fat and protein. So we feel happy in our brain and we feel full in our stomach when we eat fat and protein. But when we eat carbohydrates, firstly, we are not aware that we are full. So we end up overeating. And then we also trigger this insulin response, which means that when insulin starts dropping, it triggers hunger again. So if you think about the last time you had Chinese food, for example, after 2 to 3 hours, you wanted to eat again because you just gave yourself a very high carbohydrate load, after which you probably wanted to sleep, but also became very, very hungry very quickly. So as we move towards less carbohydrates in our diet, we get benefits of how the body responds to these food items. And that's really important to also understand. So you can sort of hack your body in that sense. And when you thought you were being greedy, you were not. That's how your body behaves. And again, this is another way of projecting the same thing. We are now looking at the long-term benefits. So this was, what if I just eat less? So chronic calorie restriction. Over a period of time, insulin tapers off, and then we hit a plateau and we stop losing weight. Whereas if you keep doing intermittent fasting, then you can achieve more and more improvement in your insulin resistance and the hyperinsulinemia that we get, which means that we'll continue to lose fat, our insulin sensitivity gets better, our muscle growth becomes better, and our metabolic health obviously becomes better. So the pictures from here on are all the stuff that I eat. So as you can see here, this is, I think, some tandoori chicken effectively. The reason the salad is shining is because there's about 2 spoons of olive oil in there. That's cheese, paneer, whichever way you want to call it. That's full fat yogurt, dahi, and you can see some berries in there to provide sweetness. So there's the, and then a whole bunch of salad. So that could be a meal. My wife is more of a vegetarian person, so she'll have paneer, but something similar. And what I mean to say is, when you think about intermittent fasting, you don't have to think of it as a diet. This is not a diet, this is a lifestyle. And you're still going to have all the fun stuff you like. There is no restriction on all the fun stuff you like. The only thing that's missing from here is all the processed carbohydrates, which is breads, rotis, pastas, those type of things. But all the good stuff, which really feel great in the mouth, they're good to taste, they make you feel happy in the brain, and your stomach feels nice and happy, are all the things that will still remain with this way of looking at food. What not to eat, again, this is a very good science behind it. So if we just work our way through normal standard diet, right? So that's that line. So breakfast, lunch, dinner, as we go through with our snacks of the day, insulin goes up and down. As soon as you take carbohydrates out of that, you see that the peaks and troughs have got better. And of course, fasting, insulin nice and low right through. So our insulin starts going down. The way our body responds to sugar starts getting better. And so all these metabolic problems start improving. What are the other benefits? And this is where I think intermittent fasting is better than just, other ways of looking at weight or disease management, because there are other benefits that we have found fasting gives us. If you think about every religion in the world, we have some form of fasting, whether Navratri or Ramazan or Lent, whatever system you might follow, every culture recognized the benefits of fasting. And there was a mandated duration of fasting in there. And there are now studies to show that, if you fast for 7 to 10 days, and this is real fasting for 7 to 10 days, the risk of cancer reduces significantly. So there are many other benefits of fasting that we are now recognizing. It has an immunomodulatory effect. So people with rheumatoid arthritis and many other autoimmune disorders can benefit from them. There are now studies coming out to show people tolerate chemotherapy much better. So the side effects of chemotherapy are much lower in people who are fasting. So all the recovery from diseases and disorders is what I'm talking about, is much better. If we are all destined to live for, let's say, 80 years, why not? Why live for 40 years as a young person and 40 years as an old person? Why not aim to live 60, 70 years as a young person and only 10 years as an older person? And that is the benefit one can get from intermittent fasting. So as we go into fat burning mode, basically our body is now going to break down these free fatty acids into something called ketones. Ketones can freely travel between cells. They can go to the brain also. And so the brain, instead of using glucose, can quite happily use ketones. And this is something that uh, has been recognized for a long period of time. In fact, in children who have retractable, resistant, sorry, non-retractable epilepsy, ketogenic diet is given to try and control epilepsy in their brains. We know this. Ketones are really good for us. And because they are freely permeable into the brain, there's no problem in using that, or the brain loves to use it as a fuel for us. So the longer one fasts, we get more ketones, and ketones therefore can be used as a source of energy because they have the same sort of configuration that can be utilized. Fatty acids can be used in the Krebs cycle or the TCA cycle for energy production. That is also very well known. So all these methods are already available. And as you can see here, if we combine that with exercise, we can get some more benefits out of it. And this is the sort of a simplistic representation of the same thing, that when there is glucose in the brain, there might be a lot of activity, but it's sort of all jumbled up. Whereas when your brain is in ketones, it's nice and calm. And for the doctors in this group, I'll say I'm sure you've seen patients with diabetic ketoacidosis. And one of the common things your patient with DKA will have is loss of appetite, nausea, and vomiting, because ketones are appetite suppressants. And when we start treating DKA, one of the first indicators is when the patient says, I'm feeling hungry now, because ketones have started dropping. So ketones are being in a ketotic state really helps control hunger, because that's one of the things that always comes up. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. So our brain is more calm, and it doesn't desire food exactly in the same way as you would otherwise. So ketones are great from that point of view also. One of the things that always comes up is around muscle mass. If I fast, I'll lose muscle, I'll become thin. It's not only loss in fat, it's also loss in muscle. I don't want to take that risk. My body will go into starvation mode. Again, that's all a myth. To go into starvation mode, your total body fat has to be less than 4%. So those historical pictures we used to see about children in Africa, skin and bones, the marasmic child, as we read in our books in medical school, that's really, really uncommon. We are talking about fasting. This is deliberate, planned calorie restriction. It's not enforced. If you think about Gandhiji and so on, he would fast for 20, 30 days. Nothing happens. The body has amazing ways of generating energy from the stores we have. Now, again, we know that 1 gram of carbohydrate gives us 4 calories of energy. And 1 gram of fat roughly gives us 8. Some books may say 9 calories per gram. So fats are really efficient source of energy. They almost give us twice the amount of energy that carbohydrates or proteins might give us. And so if you think about 1 kg of fat, again, 1,000 grams of fat, that would convert to about 8,000 calories, right? So if you ate 0 for the next 24 hours, and your daily energy requirement is 2,000 calories, 1 kg of fat burning in your body would give you 4 days of fuel to keep running. So theoretically, you could go with 0 energy intake for 4 days and lose only 1 kg of fat. And all of us have 1 kg of fat somewhere in our body, right? So there's nothing to worry about from that point of view. Like I mentioned, during fasting state, some of our counter-regulatory hormones actually go up. And we know growth hormone also rises in sleep. That's why sleep is really important for good health and good muscle building, but also is fasting, because that also helps in growth hormone rise and therefore maintaining muscle mass. And there are some studies to show the same applies to testosterone, and obviously we know that correlates with muscle mass also. In fact, as we get older, testosterone levels will drop in all of us. One way to make sure it continues to remain high is by intermittent fasting. And then 2016 is when Professor Oshumi won his Nobel Prize for autophagy. This is the ultimate breakthrough about how the body recycles itself, rejuvenates itself, that cells that were supposed to die, how they're killed by our cells, and then the material, all the building blocks, proteins and so on, are then recycled into new cells. And we know this happens all the time. Our gut will change in about 3 to 5 days. All the cells will be recycled into new cells. So high turnover areas will be of that nature. But if you start intermittent fasting, the body then thinks, okay, I'm not getting my sources from the outside. I better bring them from the inside. And so what happens then is, it's what cells it would have destroyed tomorrow, it will destroy today and recycle them. And so slowly you're creating younger and younger version of yourself compared to what you were. And that's why you'll notice that people with intermittent fasting who lose weight don't tend to develop wrinkly or saggy skin. In fact, the skin gets better. It's nice and tight and shiny compared to somebody who might have gone on a crash diet where the skin just drops off, because the autophagy of your skin cells is happening at the same time. And so the skin keeps up with whatever weight loss you're having, as do all the internal organs, right? So on the inside, we have something called stem cells, which keep us going and can regenerate. But again, we don't have any physiological method of regenerating our stem cells. Of course, in medicine, there are various growth factors we can use to regenerate our, or rather to stimulate our stem cells. But intermittent fasting has been shown to trigger autophagy and trigger stem cells to make us younger from the inside. And then, of course, there's this thing about hunger. How do I deal with hunger? I will feel hungry, and then I feel like eating. And this is all, again, very well understood with hormones. There are basically two hormones. One is ghrelin, the hunger hormone, leptin, the satiety hormone, which tells us, I'm full, I don't need to eat more. And this disbalance between ghrelin and leptin is what leads to weight gain. Ghrelin is a very interesting hormone. It's released in spurts. And if you think about hunger, even when as a child you might have fasted, hunger actually doesn't sort of go that way if you're not eating. It comes in pangs and then disappears, and pangs and disappears, right? So it's a matter of getting over that hunger pang, and then everything goes back to normal. And it happens again, and it goes back to normal. And you might have found that when you were hungry, you had a mug of coffee or 2 glasses of water or whatever else was available, and hunger then disappears and life goes back to normal. And there might have been other days when you were just too busy. You had no choice but to just ignore hunger, and then life went back to normal. Nothing changed, right? So there's a lot of sort of psychological element of hunger, and of course, cyclical element. If you have lunch every day at 1 o'clock, you will feel hungry at 1 o'clock because your stomach will say, right, it's 1 o'clock, let me get my food. And that's when ghrelin will rise. But if nothing goes in, or you expand the stomach by drinking loads of water and things like that, the ghrelin stimulus will go away and hunger will go away. It's as simple as that. So again, it's not about self-control or I'm weak or anything of that sort. It is, once you understand this, it's very simple to deal with. So let's say you were due for lunch at 1 o'clock, your brain told your stomach and it starts grumbling and you say, right, I'm feeling hungry, I better go and eat. But if you ignore it for whatever reason, the body says, okay, we still need some energy. If it's not coming from food in the stomach, let me go to my plan B, which is drop insulin levels, go to the fat stores, release fat, start burning it. Our body cannot remain in sugar burning and fat burning at the same time. It can either be in sugar burning mode or fat burning mode, can't do both together. So insulin has to drop so that sugar burning stops. Only then fat burning can start. And as soon as you eat, you go right back, especially if you ate a lot of carbohydrates. Fat burning has to stop, only then sugar burning will start. So the trick is to keep yourself longer and longer in fat burning mode so that you get the benefit of that. And fat is a better energy source. It's a more efficient energy source, and it doesn't mess around with your insulin. So it's the best way to actually run your body. And our body was designed that way, right? From sort of ancient times to recent times when we were still farmers. That's how we ate and that's how we lived. Then a short few words about adverse reactions. People will say, I fasted and I developed headaches. Therefore, I have to stop. I become grumpy. And this word hangry, hungry and angry happens. And as soon as I eat something, especially if I have a chocolate or something else, then I start feeling better. And that's quite true. The good thing about that is actually headache is a good sign because ketones are vasodilators, or sorry, they improve the circulation of blood in the brain. And so that headache is actually showing that your body is using ketones. Don't worry about it. One, you might be slightly dehydrated or salt and water depleted. Make sure you're drinking enough fluids and taking salt. But also you can take tea or coffee if that works for you. And if you need paracetamol, take paracetamol for the first few days. Usually after that, this will settle down and the headaches will go away. It's just a matter of adapting to a ketone-based system, and then headaches will not be a problem at all. The hungry and angry bit is again because your body and your brain was used to sugars. Now that your brain and your body is not getting sugar, you get this short-tempered behavior, but I'll guarantee you, if you persist, it will go away. Constipation, obviously your lifestyle has changed. So some people notice that they get constipated, but more importantly, 50% of our water actually comes from food. So if we are not eating food for a period of time, then what will happen is that the amount of fluid you're taking has gone down. And so it's very, very, very important to drink a lot of fluids because dehydration may be cause of your constipation than anything else. So make sure you're drinking water, black tea, black coffee, nimbu pani with salt, not sugar, whatever you like, have a lot of that so that you don't get dehydrated and you don't get constipated. Cramps. So like I said, insulin causes salt and water retention by the kidney. So now that we are dropping insulin levels, there will be a little bit of salt loss, which is how your blood pressure will also start going down, as is the water loss. So we need to replenish that. And so salty nimbu pani in the north of India, as in Ladakh and all that, they also drink salty coffee. If you like that, you can have that. But make sure you're eating a bit of salt in some shape or form to make sure you don't develop cramps. Again, even if you are developing cramps, it's probably because you're dehydrated or you're low on salt. Take those. Once you understand that, you know what you need to do, and you'll get over them. Your body will adapt to that. Hunger, I've sort of touched upon. Inability to fall asleep is a very, very interesting phenomenon. Again, this is because your brain is buzzing. It's not because when you think, oh, I haven't eaten, I can't fall asleep. The reason is because if you've one of those people who've decided to have an early dinner, and now you're sort of on an empty stomach when you go to bed, the reason you can't fall asleep is because your brain is buzzing with the ketones you've just running on at the moment. And so your brain wants to be excited, it wants challenge, it wants to do stuff. Of course, you're trying to sleep. So accept it. And again, your body will adapt to that and you'll be fine. Swings in blood sugar level, this is obviously specific to people with diabetes or on any medication. Strongly advise people who are on any anti-diabetic medication to speak to your doctor before you do anything of this sort. If you want to speak with me, we can do that separately. But swings in blood sugar is a definite concern, depending on specific types of medication you might be on. People who are not diabetic do not have anything called low sugar. There is no condition in this world called low sugar. The body knows very nicely how to control its sugar levels. There is something called neoglucogenesis, new sugar generation. The body knows, the liver knows how to generate as much sugar as it needs. It will burn fat, convert it into sugar. So don't worry about low sugar. It doesn't happen. And then ketones. We've been talking about ketones. It's not the same as diabetic ketoacidosis. Firstly, diabetic ketoacidosis is extremely rare in type 2 diabetic patients per se. There are certain newer types of anti-diabetic medication where there's a small risk. And again, that's why it's very, very important to speak to your doctor about that risk. But most of the times when we're talking about ketones, we're talking of normal physiological ketones. You're not in acidosis, which is a very, very specific condition in patients with diabetes. So that will not happen. Don't worry about it. And that is about 1 hour. So I will stop here just to remind you that the things morally and ethically I should be telling you, I do want to remind you that, and that I do practice in that sort of way. And thank you very much. If you'd like to join us, my wife and I, we've set up this Facebook group, which is just a sort of community of people who are interested in intermittent fasting. And these are some of the pictures of food that we eat. Hopefully they all look, especially if you're a non-vegetarian, I hope it looks appetizing to you. Thank you very much. We'll open up